Hello. Welcome, everyone. It's so great to have you with us this evening. If you are here for our final webinar as part of our 2023 Environmental and Reproductive Health Film and Webinar Series, you are in the right place. So we'll give it a minute here as folks filter in. But thank you for stopping by. I've got a little bit of housekeeping to do, so I will go ahead and start with that. Sorry, I'm organizing my desktop here. If you have any tech issues, please privately chat with our tech support, Fabiola, who is the frog icon. If you have any issues, please chat with her. I want to thank you for attending today's discussion. So everyone is muted so as not to be distracting. And I also want to let you know that you can turn on closed captions and or pick a preferred language for those captions under the little Zoom icon that has the CC and the colon. So if you need a different language, that is how we can accommodate you this evening. So this event will be recorded and we will email you a copy next week. And I provide information for continuing education units. So if you need that to supply to credentialing bodies, I will be able to provide you with that. There'll be an opportunity in the middle to kind of tell me that you're here, and then you'll get that in your follow-up email. So just a little bit about how this is going to go. I'm going to start us off with a quick introduction before moderating our discussion with our four wonderful panelists. And then I'm going to leave time at the end for Q&A from our audience. But we actually got a number of questions submitted during registration, so we'll see how that goes also. So a little bit about me. My name is Kelly Dennings, and my pronouns are she and her. I work from my home in Jacksonville, Florida, otherwise known as Miccosukee, Timucua, and Seminole Land, where many individuals face displacement and suffering, and I hope one day they receive restorative measures. I'm also going to give a description of myself for folks that can't see me, but to also acknowledge the privilege that I hold in these conversations. So I'm a short, white, middle-class, able-bodied, middle-aged, cisgender woman with short brown hair standing in my office. I'm a campaigner with the Center for Biological Diversity, working to develop and execute campaigns that address the connections between reproductive health, gender equity, endless growth, and the climate and extinction crises. So I don't know how many of you have joined us on the previous webinars, but I'm going to give you a quick introduction about the center. We're a national nonprofit conservation organization that works through a combination of science, the law, activism, and creative media to protect wildlife in the wild places they need to thrive. So on the screen, you're seeing all of our different programs. So to set the stage with you, environmental health refers to environmental factors and toxicants that create poor health outcomes for humans. This includes chemicals, pollution, and climate change, which is our topic today. And reproductive justice, as defined by Sister Song, is the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and to parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. But unfortunately, climate change is putting reproductive justice at risk. So our current economy is impacting reproductive health in many ways. That can be through air, soil, and water pollution, also climate change and extreme weather events, but also the manufacturing of products with endocrine disrupting chemicals, which we've talked about in the last two webinars. You can read all about the work that we've been highlighting over the last month in a report that we put out last year titled The Influence of Environmental Toxicity, Inequity and Capitalism on Reproductive Health. And my colleague Kim is going to be putting that full report in the chat for you. We would love for you to take a look at the longer report or just the climate change chapter, if that's mostly what you're interested in. So for us, capitalism refers to market capitalist systems predicated on models of infinite growth. So while the discussion of capitalism will frequently reference racist, sexist, and classist outcomes that perpetuate reproductive injustices, it is not our intention to collapse racism, sexism, classisms, or other isms into capitalism. These interconnected topics and oppressions are all related, making it difficult to pinpoint just one problematic system. So the goal of this film and webinar series was really to continue the learning that came out of last year's report and motivate folks to be change agents. And so today we're going to talk about the harm associated with climate change. So as we continue to do research, the issue of capitalism has continued to come up as one of these oppressive systems harming people and the planet, and specifically around climate change or pollution. However, folks often find it difficult to see beyond this system that is so ingrained in our lives, and we really want to change that. So the center just conducted a new US public survey to get a sense of Americans' existing knowledge of just transition principles, their perceptions of the role corporations play in our economy, and their willingness to engage in community-level alternative economy actions. So you can read more about the report that, again, my lovely Vanna via Kim is putting in the chat. So this is another new report that we've put out. But I wanted to mention on this slide that you're seeing here, we noted solutions such as the need for healthcare for all, gender equity, and sexual and reproductive health and rights, because not only do we need to transition to alternative economic models, we need to address patriarchy as another system of oppression. All right, so I'm going to pause here, and Fabiola is going to put up a poll for us. So you don't need to take this poll unless you want continuing education credits, but this will kind of allow me to take attendance that you're here. So if you want a certificate showing that you were here, check yes on this poll. Oh, sorry, that was a loud thing of water. All right, I think you can close that, Fabiola. Hopefully most people got what they needed. So I'm excited to bring today's invite-only preview screening of the Climate Baby Dilemma to you, which is about family planning in the age of climate change. So hopefully you got to watch it this week, but for those of you that didn't, we have the director on with us today, and they're letting us keep it open one more evening. So you have until midnight Pacific tomorrow night to watch it if you didn't get a chance. So Kim is dropping that link in the chat. If you have any difficulty getting into the link, also please chat with Kim and she can help you hopefully try to address any issues you're having getting with the film. Okay. So let me introduce our wonderful, wonderful panelists. So first, we've got Vicki Lane, who's the producer and director of The Climate Baby Dilemma. Raised by environmental scientists, she became a documentary filmmaker to make engaging and impactful films on our relationship to nature, science, and the state of the world. Her other work includes a 6-part docu-series on existential risk called We're All Gonna Die, Even J. Baruchel. And the feature documentary After the Last River. So welcome, Vicki. Thank you. Our next panelist is Sarain Fox, who is an environmental and Indigenous activist. She's Anishinaabe from Batchewana First Nation. Hopefully I did that all right. And that is just outside of Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. She's a dancer, choreographer, stylist, brand ambassador, and content producer. Sarain's screen highlights include the award-winning series Rise on Viceland and co-host of the Aboriginal Peoples Television Network's Future History. Her mother and great aunt are the oral record keepers of her family, and they've passed down ancient teachings from generations of knowledge keepers and have raised her to be a proud of her Indigenous roots. And I gotta say, the center is really honored to have Sarain on our board. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Next, we have Payton Mitchell. She's an activist from rural Ontario and was a core organizer in the youth climate movement that swept through campuses in response to the IPCC's alarming 2018 report. Payton has worked on campaigns advocating against the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure and participated in the No Future, No Children pledge founded by Emma Lynn. As you'll remember from the film, the pledge called to light the real-life consequences of the climate crisis and its health impacts. And today, she lives in her hometown working remotely for a nonprofit dedicated to reskilling fossil fuel workers into the renewable energy sector. And finally, we have Dr. Adelita Cantu. Adelita is a public health nurse who's been active on the board of the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments. Her work has been instrumental in developing environmental health curriculum used in medical and nursing schools. She's deeply embedded in collaborations where she highlights the importance of social determinants to community well-being. And I must say, I met Adelita at a conference this past year, and I was so excited to talk about the social determinants with her. Known for her advocacy work with those that are underserved, she was sought to serve on San Antonio's Climate Adaptation Equity Technical Working Group. All right, wonderful. If you all want to turn on your cameras, I'm going to stop screen sharing and we will start our discussion. It's really so wonderful to see you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Fabi. Thanks, Kim, for all your help with the intro. Okay. So let me just say a few more things here. But, you know, when planning a family, people are concerned about a lot of things. Supporting the child financially, you know, a change in potential lifestyle, the birthing experience, and increasingly the environment. So that can kind of go two different ways, right? Some folks are concerned about the planet their children will inherit, but others are worried about the impact that their child would have on the planet. And starting a family is such an individual decision. And two of our speakers with us today really talk about that openly in the film. So thank you for being so candid. So Vicki, let me ask you, you know, as the director and producer and you know, brainchild of this wonderful piece of work, in your bio, you mentioned having environmental scientists for parents. So did that upbringing lead you to make this film? And if not, what did? Tell us a little bit about your thinking.
Well, certainly I think the upbringing led me to filmmaking. Because I just was growing up and felt like I was being exposed to a lot of issues, but a lot of people weren't aware that they were happening. So I just felt like there was a disconnect, and like scientists can be kind of, and academics can use really complicated language, and that's not their job. Their job isn't necessarily to communicate to the public, although I think it should play an important role. So that's why I became a filmmaker. And not all of the work that I've done has been looking at science and the environment and society. I think what I try to do is look at how, you know, I also don't like how a lot of environmental docs or they serve a purpose, but ones that just see the environment as like humans not touching it. So like BBC Earth, you know, those type of things. I look for films where we understand our relationship to nature and we are part of it and it's part of us. And I felt like all my work kind of, I don't like to call it environmental, social political elements are in there. So with this film, how did it come about? So that's kind of the work I've been doing for years. And then Dr. Britt Ray, who's in the film, she does science communication. She actually just won a major award from the National Academy of Sciences for science communication today. So that's pretty cool. But I've just been following her work for a long time. And she and I were having dinner, and she was about to do a TED Talk in New York and was thinking about this question because she was newly married and struggling with the idea of whether or not to have a child. So I decided to follow her the week before her TED Talk. So that's in the film and was some of the first footage we did. And then a few months later, this issue just started really blowing up. Like that's when the pledge was launched, and a few other initiatives. And it started being in the press more and more. So we really followed it from a moment when Britt just thought whether she was alone, whether this was just in climate circles, to really seeing that there's a widespread trend of people connecting their reproductive choices to climate.
Wow, that's awesome. So it went from like meeting somebody at dinner to a TED Talk to a film.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So,
all right, let me turn it over to you, Adelita. You really bring so much experience and expertise to tonight's panel. So I was hoping you could do some level setting for us. How does climate change impact our health, and specifically reproductive health and starting families?
Sure. Great questions, and good evening, everyone. So you can take it from a broad level and then specifically reproductive health. So we know that climate change and the issues that climate change brings about, the intense heat, rising sea levels, increasing carbon dioxide, all of those things have health impacts. Cardiovascular disease increases, asthma increases, allergen increases, infectious disease increases. But specifically, when you're looking at reproductive health, I mean, everything that the mother takes in, the mom takes in, the woman takes in, or the person that's pregnant takes in, goes to the fetus, correct? So everything that they're breathing in, everything that they're ingesting, and that includes the chemicals, are passed on to the fetus. So let's take, for instance, California with their wildfires. We know that particulate matter, small particulate matter, is very, very prevalent in wildfire smoke. So breathing that in, those particulate matters get into the lungs of the adult. It interferes with the proper brain transfer of oxygen to the blood that keeps all our organs working, and also gets into the fetus. And those particulate matters contain very, very harmful chemicals. And that's what's really important, because not only is the person who's pregnant taking it in, but they're passing it on to their fetus as well. So anything that happens in the environment of the person that's pregnant, the fetus is going to be experiencing that. And the particulate matter contains those chemicals that are very dangerous. They're carcinogenics, they have neurotoxin qualities, and then they are also damaging to the lungs.
Yeah, scary stuff, honestly, but I appreciate you kind of centering us there. So over to you, Sarain. Thank you so much for being here. So you're one of the folks in the movie that really shares your personal story. So thank you for being so open in that way. But it deals with questions surrounding parenting and the climate crisis. So how are those themes informing your work as an activist and the things that you advocate for? Oh, you're still muted.
4 years, guys. 4 years of Zoom. Okay. Yeah, great question. So as you all may or are going to see in the film tonight, yeah, I'm very honest about my viewpoint. And I think how my decision, or how I'm informed in terms of my work and my activism, is entirely by my indigeneity and by young people who surround me. And so I think for a very long time, even before I became a mother, all of my work was centered around doing good work that young people could see and I could be an example to, and doing work for my community, for the future unborn babies, whether they were mine or not. So I think my work has been centered around the possibility of not being able to share my land, my culture, my songs, my creation story with my babies. So for me, now my work centers around how I am protecting my children and how I am protecting the future for them. And, it's not lost on me that in this particular moment, you have to double down, especially when you have made decisions like this, like decisions like I have to start a family right now. Because when I look around, all around me, absolutely, I see signs that the world is just coming to the most tumultuous place, like coming to an end almost. But I am comforted by my creation story that tells me that this will happen, that prophecies that tell me that this is when the big decisions come, the decisions on whether or not we decide to work together to collectively save this earth, what we have, or we just ignore it and collectively lose everything that we have thus far. So yeah, I think my work is informed by the land, informed by my people, and informed by the future of the land and our connection to the land. And even more so, it's about this concept of land back, which is beyond just having a future, beyond just having land. It's about being free enough in your mind to actually identify with how you exist on the land, which is outside of just physical attachment to land. It's about the freedom you have to identify with the land and understand that land is not ownership, land is not something that we can modify, that land is survival. So if you save the land, you save yourself. So if I'm actively working to save the land, I save myself, I save the future for my children.
Oh, well, thank you so much for saying that. And it was actually one of the questions that we got in the registrations. People were interested in knowing more about an Indigenous-led decolonization and land back movements. So maybe we can come back to that at the end and you can share a few more stories about successes or what you're seeing in that movement. So
yeah, absolutely.
There was interest in that. Okay, awesome. All right, Payton, over to you. So, what would you say? You were such a great advocate in the film. So what would you say that today your advocacy is around? And, how does this question of having kids during the climate crisis drive your work as a young professional activist?
Yeah, thank you, Kelly, for that question. I was reflecting on this earlier, and if you had asked me a year ago, I would have said that my main focus is the student movement. I think the student movement is so powerful, and I was really involved in it for a big chunk of my life, and I've actually just graduated, so I feel very much in a space of transition and moving from being very defined as a student organizer, as somebody who was involved in the climate strikes, and as an elected executive on my association for several years. But right now that I'm back in my hometown and I'm back in a rural community, and very much closer to land and to like the community that I had grown up in and the people that I was raised by, a lot of the work that I have been focusing on is community building. I actually live next to Six Nations Reserve. So like the concept of Indigenous solidarity and land back is actually very present in the way that I need to engage in activist spaces. So what I've worked on in the past year or so that I've been sort of reintegrating into my community is a lot of work trying to build those community bonds between sort of the settler youth or the settler young people in this area, and as well as like Indigenous young people, so that we can kind of build up, really similar to what Sarain was saying, that we can like build up from our like own recognition of the land and like what it means and the history, like the unique colonial history of the area that we live in, which is I'm calling in from the Haldimand Tract, which is in southwestern Ontario. So what we've been doing is we had these like educational bonfires. We also planned a benefit show. There's like regularly these like unity jams that happen. So like things that kind of bring people in together. And what we're looking to do in the new year is do a book club where we're going to be learning about like the specific history of the territories that we're on, and kind of discussing with each other. And the hope with that is that we can start from this place of where we are and what the history of this territory is, like our community, not even necessarily Canada or North America as a whole, but really like what has happened here, and how can we work together to facilitate land back, to encourage it, to build power together, and to take leadership in the community. And so that's sort of like the big vision of like where I would hope, you know, a little book club could end eventually.
That's fabulous. I know you kind of wear a number of hats now. So you know, and I recommend all of our panelists to kind of put some links in the chat for folks. So, you know, people I'm sure could model that that movement building in other locations. And so anyway, I'll work with Kim to try to get some of your websites into the chat for folks. But feel free to do it yourself also. So that's just wonderful to hear, because you're still with No Future, No Children, and this is a different group, but you're also a professional, you know, working in the fossil fuel work, right?
Well, so No Future, No Children was a campaign that existed really in to raise awareness in a different kind of way, building up to the 2019 federal election in Canada. So it was very much a moment in time. I don't even think the website exists anymore. I think that we stopped paying the fees for it because the campaign, to us, it served its purpose. We did get a fair amount of media attention around the federal election, and we were able to like create the conversations that we had wanted to create. So moved on from that, but it was a campaign of a bigger organization called Climate Strike Canada, which was like the Fridays for Future for Canada, which I mean, I'm no longer a part of that because I'm no longer a student, but it was a really exciting time.
Awesome. Okay, gotcha. Well, thank you so much. All right, so I want to acknowledge, you know, there was a section of the film where it mentions US fertility numbers being low as compared to other countries, right? And as noted in my opening remarks, the center advocates for improved gender empowerment and a change to our extractive economy, especially in the United States, where we have a large environmental footprint. So this topic really touches on a lot of things, Vicki. So what have been the reactions, both positive or negative, that you're getting from the film?
Well, I thought it was really interesting. So this, okay, I'm not on mute. This film was originally for a Canadian broadcaster. So it's not yet available in the US, but hopefully soon. If anyone on the link here works for PBS or something, that'd be awesome. But essentially, one of the things that really struck me is a couple hours after it dropped, or there was a trailer, on IMDb, there's ratings for movies. And all of a sudden, I was getting like a whole bunch of 10s and a whole bunch of 1s, which aren't like realistic for a movie. And all the 1s were like coming from the US, but the US couldn't even see the movie. So it was like really strange. And I think a lot of people, when you bring in the topic, even I think the trailer was maybe circulating, like Britt Ray, who's in the film, put it out on our newsletter, and she often gets kind of some flack about this topic. So I think when you put a woman's right to choose alongside climate, it sort of activates a certain right-wing audience that can be really irrational on these topics and jump to conclusions. So even in the film itself, it mentions how there's kind of this like discourse on Fox News type of channels, or in comments, because it's the woman who did Birth Strike, they were on Fox News, and like looking at the comments from that, you know, it's sort of like, oh, in the developing world, like all they're having so many kids, and it's just us in the Western nations, and like then it kind of ekes into these conversations around population control, like the states trying to tell us not to have kids. And I think when the No Future, No Children pledge was launched too, there was so much misunderstanding. What birth strike was and what No Future, No Children was. Like, no one is telling anybody that they should or shouldn't have kids in these movements. It's really about, it's a reflection for me. What the film is, beyond that question of having kids or not, is that it's a reflection of the deep fear that youth and young people feel. And so, but in order to highlight that and like kind of get ahead of the confusion, we had to introduce parts of the film that unpack that this wasn't about population control, because the sort of Malthusian arguments is not really what the film's about. It's about the psychological impact of the climate crisis and also the very real health effects that climate change can have for pregnant women. So those are kind of the things that all circle around in this conversation. And there's more too. It opens up conversations about, like, is this a white concern? Like, is this mostly predominantly around people of privilege that haven't experienced existential threats before, which is totally valid and accurate, and Sarain does such a good job of putting that into context. So yeah, the film opens up a lot of conversations about a variety of issues.
I was going to say though, but that's like one of the positive parts of it.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah. No, it's a good thing. It's a good thing for sure.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of where the center sees our role so often is, you know, trying to just bring light to the topics that are so often taboo in discussing. And so we're all about helping to open up these conversations, which is why we love to do these and share folks' films. So thank you so much. Okay, over to you, Adelita.
Just one quick note. If people want to go onto IMDb and just give it a normal rating, like whatever you thought the film was, like, because a 10 and a 1, like the film is neither of those things. So yeah, that I would appreciate if we
what a
can
perfect
get my
call to action.
Yeah, well, no, I have better. You guys have better call to actions for sure, but if that's a minor one. Anyway,
Well,
sorry, I interrupted.
I will ask Kim to help me find the link and we can, you know, put it in the follow-up email if you want us to, Vicki, let me know. So Adelita, the film points out, and the report that we've been kind of talking about over the last, you know, month was the reproductive harm associated with, you know, fossil fuel, industrial ag, plastics, and climate change. So the film talks about this statistically significant number of miscarriages in the days following wildlife exposure in San Francisco a couple of years ago. So tell us about the work that you've been doing with the Association of Nurses for a Healthy Environment, which I'm a huge fan of, and how they're advocating kind of working at the systems level to get to change.
Yeah, certainly. And I just want to say too, Kelly, that it's not just miscarriages. Exposure to smoke from wildfires, even in the short span of 3 weeks to a month of that. Also, you're looking at low birth weight. And with low birth weight, there are going to be consequences for the infant, and then as they grow into the adulthood as well. So all of that has been associated with exposure to air pollution. So the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments is the only professional nursing organization that is focused on the intersection of health and the environment, understanding that the environment as a social determinant of health does impact our health, and in this case, because of climate change, very negatively in many different perspectives, certainly reproductive health, which we're talking about tonight. Now, the Alliance does this in several ways. One is through advocating, and we do a lot of advocating, not only certainly to our legislative officials, policymakers. We have advocate days for nurses where we teach them and give them a skill set on how to talk with policymakers and how to bring this to their attention and what brings this to their forefront. So we've had days in Washington, D.C., we've had days in local capitals where nurses come and talk with their legislators about these particular issues. So that's one way we're advocating. The other way that we're advocating is just increasing the awareness of nurses that are in everywhere, that are practicing at the bedside, that are working in the community, that are working in schools, that to understand that connection better prepares us to deal with the patient populations that we see across the lifespan. And then the other thing that we're really focused on, and to me it's not fast enough, is how we as academicians, as educators, me in nursing school, as well as in medical schools, dental schools, how are we educating the future workforce, healthcare workforce, to understand that connection? Many of our professional organizations like the American Nurses Association, the American Medical Association are supporting, including in the curriculum, issues around climate change and health. And so one of the things I've done in my nursing school and the students that I teach in public health is created a module just on climate change and health, calling it Climate Change as a Public Health Issue. And then creating some assignments and experiences where students can make that connection. Because I think, as we were talking about with the student movement, I mean, that's our future. And to be better prepared to understand the future and the impact you have is for us to raise the awareness. And we're, as the Alliance, we're trying to do that in numerous ways, but particularly for a future workforce, so that that link is understood, and then best to educate our patient population, and particularly reproductive health, because we know that there are some negative consequences that pollution, air pollution, breathing in certain things like air particulate matter, small particulate matter, will have a negative effect on the person pregnant as well as the infant. And the important thing is to remember it's just not a one-time thing that infant may suffer. I mean, that asthma could go on into their adulthood. And asthma many times means lost days of work, lost days of going to school, and then that impacts academic achievement. Academic achievement, we know, is very much tied to socioeconomic status. And so then you see it as that social determinant of health.
I'm so glad you said that, and I'm glad you defined it, because I'm such a fan of it, and I should have made it a formal question that I asked you, but you got it in there. So yes.
Well, and I know when we are discussing that at the conference, and that's one of the things Annie does as well, the Alliance does. We have an annual conference where we have a nursing summit where we talk about this information, but it's important to see environmental health as one of those social determinants of health.
Yeah. And maybe Kim will help me. There's a good CDC link, Kim, where it talks about the social determinants of health, that maybe we can share that in the chat. And I'm sorry I said association earlier and it's Alliance, so thank you. I got a follow-up question, just this is a personal thing. Am I going to go to a doctor soon for my annual exam and be asked about my environment and how, it should just be a thing that you're asked?
It should be, particularly if you come in with particular issues like asthma, like allergies, like all those different things. There are assessments out there, not only for the individual, what you're exposed to, but for your house. What kind of allergens do you have in your house? Are you aware of that? What kind of chemicals do you have in there? Do you have mold? So often, and unfortunately, what's happening right now is that piece is missing from diagnosing what's going on with that person. And because that's missing, you're sending them right back into the environment that creates the cycle of it continuing over and over and over again.
All right, thank you. Well, I'm going to be looking out for that. Hopefully your medical students your nursing students that are going through, and they're going to take care of me in 20 years from now. All right, Sarain, over to you. You beautifully articulate in the film that there are some real cross-cultural differences when folks contemplate starting a family. And we've touched on this a little bit. But you also say that this question can be a window into how some people have struggled with these existential threats before. So can you elaborate on what that means for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So to just break this down in a real blunt way, I think many Indigenous people, many members of my family, have a view that we are already living in post-apocalyptic times. So what I mean by that is we have already seen what it looks like to have the end of the world. People came, they took our women and children. We witnessed entire villages, entire communities murdered at newcomers' hands. We watched viruses take over, and then we watched our language, our culture, our land be slowly taken away from us. And now we live in a situation where we are only now in 2023 starting to recognize the truths that Indigenous people have been speaking for so long, which is that thousands of babies were buried in unmarked graves in Canada and the US. The US is a whole reckoning that's coming that they haven't even started to deal with yet. But so when this question came about, and when I talk about it like this, it's because there's so much judgment around Indigenous communities. There's so much judgment around what it looks like to live within an Indigenous community. And so to talk about climate change, to talk about land, and then to also talk about reproductive rights and reproductive health and this choice of having children, it's really interesting because it's super layered. In one hand, Indigenous people have not been allowed to raise our children. We have not been allowed to be seen as fit parents. We haven't been allowed to have even the freedom to choose. Even if you want to talk about things like vaccines, it's pretty normal for Indigenous families to want to take care of their kids outside of the Western medical system. And especially in the United States, if you choose to not vaccinate your child, that could be a reason why your child is apprehended. It's the same in Canada. It's the same for me. I choose the same thing, and this is a conversation that can be, I'll just say heated, but it can also be dangerous. And then it's also layered because when you look from the inside out, there's so many judgments on how Indigenous people raise their kids on reserves and off reserve, and our connection to culture and our connection to the land and to Indigenous healing. There's been a court case just near Six Nations. You know, you were talking about joining from the Halderman track. There was a case where there was a young girl whose parents didn't want her to have her cancer treated in a Western hospital, and her parents were ultimately charged because they were charged when she died for not taking care of her. And so for me, this is a question about sovereignty. This is a question that goes beyond just an existential crisis. Like, yes, I pose that question. Perhaps it seems like the world is ending and like there's no hope and no future for some people right now. And it seems like an incredible privilege to me to be able to wake up all of a sudden right now when the world has been on fire for so many and only decide that you want to take care of you and yours and your future now. And that's not a judgment. That's just like literally a question. Like, think about your life and think about when you became afraid. When did you become afraid that your future was at stake? Because if it's only in this lifetime, some of us have been living with that idea of what's next. Like, how can there be a future? And I think from that place of complete despair, so many of my ancestors, so many of my elders were faced with that one question. How will we go on? How will we go on in the face of nothing? And one of those people, one of my ancestors, chose life. They chose life, and they chose to keep moving, and they chose to keep trying, and they chose to keep searching for our songs and listening for our creation stories. And they continue to keep going to the land over and over again, looking for their teachings, looking to harvest their medicines and take care of their people. And because one of those women, one of my ancestors had that hope, I am here. And so I felt like it's an inherent responsibility to not just say, oh, there's nothing, and so I'm not going to give anything, and instead say, oh, there's nothing, so it's my responsibility to make something.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Sarain, it's always so moving every time I hear Sarain talk about this topic. But like I know for Britt, it's in her book, Generation Dread, that she's writing through the movie. She kind of touches on this, and it was also very profound for me to kind of like do this switch in terms of thinking about the question. Like for a lot of people of privilege who are struggling with the feeling that the state is not caring about the safety of your baby or your potential children or children, the state does not care about their safety because they're not doing anything about climate change. And if you tap into that feeling and then you think about it like, wow, for like hundreds of years, the state has not cared about the humanity of Indigenous babies and Indigenous children and like Black families. And, we're like, slavery was not that long ago in the scope of history. So when you realize that, if you feel a fear for your child and then you kind of, it opens a window into like a little bit, not the same by any means, but I think it's like an important reflection to make in these questions, basically.
Thanks, Vicki.
Well, and I think you're right, not to just interrupt, but I think what you're speaking of is the beauty of lived experience. And historically, lived experience has been pit against us. And I actually think, especially in this conversation, and especially right now, sharing our lived experience and being able to feel someone else's humanity is the only way that we can continue to have these conversations and make them turn into tangible action and not into existential dread.
Yeah, well put.
And I'll just point out there's, a comment in the chat about this idea of hope and having children, and that is a way to provide hope. So there's folks in there in the chat also providing some other resources and things like that. I gotta say though, it can be scary and complicated, and these are important and tough decisions, and I'm not sure everybody is as thoughtful as the folks that are on the call tonight, right? So, Payton, let me bring it over to you here. We're about to close out, folks. So if you have a question, let me know, and now's the time to put it in the chat. But so Payton, you were one of the first. We talked about this No Future, No Children pledge. So what kind of reaction did you receive from either the media or your family when you were so open about your decision at the time?
Yeah. So in regards to the media, the media in Canada were pretty supportive of the pledge. I don't remember getting many challenging questions, and I was also sort of on a radio interview syndicate in the States, and I think possibly part of it was we put a lot of thought and care into how we would present this type of pledge to the world, and sort of the characters that we would play within that, and that it means different things to different people. So any pushback that we received was more so from like the other people in the activist community than it was from like the media at large. But within my family, I received I received a lot of pushback. I come from a long, proud line of teen moms. So the women in my family have not experienced adulthood separate from motherhood. And so hearing me like tell them that I was not going to participate in motherhood at all, or that I don't have an intention of doing that, I think was really hurtful to them, like in a very personal way, that I'm taking away an opportunity for us to bond and for us to relate to each other in a really special and unique way, because like they are very proud to be parents and to be mothers. So that was a very real thing that I had to navigate with my own mom, with my grandmother, and with other women in my family who like very much challenged me on this decision. To go back to sort of what Sarain had said, like so see for Indigenous people that having children is an act of resistance, because it's something that has been withheld, either, you know, through forced sterilization, through the 60s group, through the foster care system, through residential schools, you know, going way back. And I think for myself as like a white blonde woman, not having children for me is my act of resistance. Like the government wants me to have children, right? Like we see this like so prevalently in the US, but it exists in Canada. I have had people say like weird things to me, commenting on like my blonde hair and my blue eyes, and how much of a shame it is that that won't be passed down to anybody. And I'm like deeply uncomfortable by comments like that. And that kind of makes me feel that like this decision is better. And not because, you know, white people shouldn't exist or anything along those lines, but being a white woman and being a white mother is a very tokenized role. Like white men politicians, they tokenize that type of role all the time. And I think that separating myself from that, in my eyes, gives me a lot of strength and puts myself in a position where I think that I can have more control over my life. And sort of like my resistance of not wanting to have children has a lot less to do with an ideology or the politics of it all, and a lot more to do with like my personal fear of being pregnant and not knowing if I can like safely have a pregnancy. When I did the documentary, I knew a couple people my age who had children, but not very many. And since I have, not since it came up, but like since I did the interviews for it, you know, tons of my friends have kids now. I have a niece who's like beautiful and looks just like me, and she's so cute. And all of these like girls who I'm friends with, like they gave birth alone during a pandemic in a hospital that was like completely like a foreign experience of like what we could have even predicted when we were expressing these fears. And you know, like these like my sister-in-law, she had COVID when she gave birth, and like that's a really scary experience for a young woman to go through. So things like that I think are very real. It's not just like the concern that a child might be unsafe, or concern for these like unpredictable like weather events in the future. It's like pregnancy is disabling, and do I feel like secure enough where I live that I can put my body in a risky position, or do I feel that like I need to, like with all the privilege that I have as an able-bodied young woman, maintain that and not put myself at that risk. And I think for some people, you know, like that it's so powerful, and that is this act of resistance, it's worth the risk to them. And for people like me, like it's not. And I think that my love for the world can be expressed in different ways, through sort of like the children of my friends that I get to be like an auntie to, and my niece, and all the other sort of like community members in my area that like I really want to be able to be there for them. Like they say, it takes a village to raise a family, and like I very much want to be a part of that village, so that I can help other people, and I'm not kind of distracted even by my own family, and not that that's inherently a distraction, but for the type of work that I want to do. And I think that, you know, we need all kinds of people in the village to make sure that we can build a strong and thriving community, so that we can withstand the chaos that is to come.
Yeah, I just want to mention one final point while we're wrapping up. For Payton, I think that in the youth that did that No Future, No Children pledge, I think part of the brilliance of it, and like part of what our role and job is in the climate movement, is to talk to people that are close to us about what the climate crisis is doing to us emotionally. So it actually is quite a political act when you tell someone in your family that the climate crisis is affecting you so personally that you do not want to bring children into this world. And I think for people that do have privilege, we're not affected by climate in the same way. Where we live off, like I'm usually in Toronto, and Toronto, you know, we didn't have bad wildfires. We don't have hurricanes, but it's for, if you tell someone in your family that in Toronto, the climate crisis hits home. And I think that's the work that we all need to be doing in our communities, is talking to people in a way that's emotionally intelligent about how climate is affecting people personally, because like there's been studies that are done that like that's actually how you move the needle, is people that connect personally to something in their own lives. Like protests are important, all these things are important, we still got to do that, writing your MPP, but to change how people vote, you have to change how people feel, I think, and how they connect to the issue. Unfortunately, that's how a lot of humans work. Self-interest.
And finally, I just want to say also on that, Vicki and Payton, thank you so much for being such a beautiful young voice. But also, you know, I love this idea of your active resistance, and I do hear that, and I wanted to just lift you up for that. And in 2019, I was pregnant, or I wasn't pregnant. I was almost pregnant with my first baby, and I had a miscarriage before Mamatasin was born. And it's really interesting because I was walking and marching for a Futures for Friday march in 2019 in late November, early December, just before the pandemic started. Yeah, so it's just interesting how all that comes full circle. So I just wanted to put it out there that I've spoken at and attended many of. So even if you're not making that pledge, even if that's not your own life decision, know that also there was a movement that was created and inspired by young people that people wanted to support and who weren't in school. So I know you say that your time is up because you're no longer a student, but I wasn't a student then. So just throwing that back at you.
I'm sorry for your loss, Sarain, but thanks for sharing.
No, I think it's important to share openly and to create that space. So many of us women have experienced that, and so many women will continue to experience this, especially as we look at the climate crisis. And I think if we can't be open, if we can't be excited when we are experiencing that, and also hold space when we're grieving, then we actually can't be a community for one another. So it starts with sharing our truth and being vulnerable so that others can do the same thing. So, miigwech though, miigwech.
Well, thank you. And Payton, I wanted to highlight one of the questions that we got in was this definition of family. And I think you really touched on that. And the center has talked about that too, about how we need to redefine what family looks like. And it doesn't have to be what we're all typically used to. So we actually have some questions.
Could I say something to that in terms of family? One of the things as a public health nurse, there are so many different types of families that people have found that give them peace, that give them a sense of well-being, particularly with our seniors, widows moving in together, or finding space together. And one of the things that we know that extends our life expectancy is keeping your social networks, keeping that sense of connection to people. Does not have to be what we traditionally think of as family, biological family. So looking for that space wherever you can is what's important.
Yeah. Can I ask you all to stay on just a few minutes, because we have gotten some questions in and I want to get to them. And I tell you, every time we do these, we're getting, anyway, we always go over, but thank you. I know, Sarain, you've got kids and everybody waiting on you. So if people need to drop, I understand.
I will stay on for a few minutes, but then I do have to go back on live television. So
okay,
it is what it is.
And I want to try to make sure that we get some land back URLs or places people can go for more information on that. But so where was I going to go? Oh, so Adelita, you were just talking about this. Somebody was asking about the managing stress that comes from these strong emotional issues. Do you have any resources or anything that we might be able to share in the chat?
Certainly. In fact, the Alliance of Nurses of Healthy Environment, I think that was put in the chat, does have resources on stress management. The important thing to know is that stress itself is very dangerous, because you have some physiological processes that happen inside your body, the release of cortisol, that when it happens for a few minutes, it's fine. But when it's over and over and over again, it then wears on your body and you create issues like metabolic syndrome, diabetes, hypertension. So again, social determinants of health. If you keep going back to that stress, it impacts what we see physiologically. If we don't address that stress, that we're not really addressing the chronic illness that person is experiencing.
Okay.
So any type of stress management, I do acupuncture. There's a lot of alternative therapies that can be done along with traditional medicine that are very, very focused and are very healing.
Okay, thank you. And Vicki, we had one question, and I want to make sure if our panelists have actions and there's a URL and a website, get those to me, because we want to get our actions and call to actions that folks can do. But this will be our last question. So somebody said, thank you, your film was insightful.
I answered it in the comments. So let's do all the things that Sarain and Payton want people to and Lambeck. We're good.
Okay, awesome. Over to you, Payton. Do you have a call to action for our audience?
A call to action. I did want to say, like, thank you to Barb in the comments. I was just reading, like, your comments are so lovely and I really appreciated reading them. So thank you so much. And I don't have any call to actions right now. All of my work is very Canada focused. So it doesn't.
And just on that note with Barb, like, it kind of really struck me recently because I had to be Emma's reference on something, and it kind of was like, oh, there was no adults around, like, in so much of these youth movements. Like, you got like adults, you know what I mean? Like, I can't believe how much you guys were doing alone that I didn't kind of clock because it was so massive, like all the organizing. And so Barb's question is about being a grandmother and like elders getting involved, and like, don't leave it all to the youth, just like get involved and support the youth in your community. So that's my call to action.
Yeah, I actually really appreciate that, Vicki. I was having a conversation with somebody today about, I mean, they were doing like an academic article about the climate movement, and they had asked me about youth leadership, and I had expressed like a massive disappointment that I had felt in 2019, that I like exactly how you're explaining here, Barb, that it was as if older adults were treating the climate crisis, like solving the climate crisis, as if it was an opportunity that they didn't want to take away from us. And I could not like express my frustration about that like enough, especially with like progressive political parties in Canada, for example, the NDP, like asking so many youth activists to run as candidates as if anyone would vote for us. And like we need to have like older people who have community connections, who have respect from the people around them, who have like very deep networks, like fully engaging with their communities and using the leadership that they have and trust that they have built over the years to express these things that the youth are expressing, and instead of just trying to put like children on pedestals and tell them to, you know, sing and dance and make you cry and laugh and all of these things, and you can applaud and say, wow, you'll make a great leader someday. So I really appreciate your comments, Barb.
All right, Sarain, any final last words?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, I'll just like shout out to so much of all of the movements that I've been involved in. It's interesting that you've been elders from Indigenous communities, so a completely different perspective. Shout out to any elders who want to get involved. So much of the organizing in our communities has been by Indigenous Nokomises, Indigenous elders who are women who were protecting their communities, or who also helped to mediate situations when our warriors were just too overwhelmed by how heated and emotional some of the situations got. So you'll look up Oka Standoff, where the Indigenous women are actually getting right in the way of protesters who are confronting violent Canadian military who are in armed gear. So just historically, it always has gone back that way. And then final thoughts, oh my gosh, I just want to second this idea of people being there for the young people. When I was at Standing Rock, I watched so many young people just show up, drop everything. People, left their schools. They created these incredible communities on the ground at Sacred Stone and at Overflow Camp. And so many of those young people were able to receive incredible nonviolent direct action training. They were able to participate in art actions. They really learned how to organize, learned how to create art messaging. And there was so much learning that happened. And they took that learning and they went to the front lines, and they trusted that the people who could be there, who should be there, would be there when they returned off the front lines. And instead, we had hundreds of young people who were left with PTSD and no healers to take care of them. My daughter's walking in. So yeah, I just want to state that so many of our young people are putting their lives on the line for our future, and we need the adults and the healers and the lawyers and everyone to be there when they do that work. We can't just ask all of these young people to do all this work and then not show up for them when it completely changes their life. So yeah, I think my call to action is that we can't just rally the troops and get young people involved in these movements. We have to walk with them every step of the way. We have to make it so that they can support their families while caring for the planet, while making these huge movements possible. And if you want to hear about Land Back, I mean, IEN Environmental Indigenous Network, I will send so many resources, but you want to talk about Land Back, you want to talk about the future, you want to talk about all these decisions, then go look at the work that the center is doing for Oak Flat. Because here's my position. What is the point in doing so much work and rallying to save a place that is literally for a coming of age ceremony if we don't have children to come of age? So I think all of us can support, whether we want to be parents or not. I love this concept that mothering is not about birthing a child. Parenting is not about birthing or giving a seed to create life. Parenting is about how we care for life. So be a mother to the planet, be a father to the planet, be a caregiver, an auntie, and uncle to the planet, and you inherently care for life. And that will care for all of us. And so we keep our circle strong, and we're not just thinking about our individual feeling, we're thinking about our collective future. And I'm thankful for that, because my kids are a part of that collective future. So Chimigwich, they're like banging at the front door, guys.
Thank you. What a wonderful,
Sarain.
wonderful way to end on. You're free to go, but I am going to have some closing remarks. So thank you. I'm going to close this out here. Thanks for staying on, y'all. But I think we've talked about this, right? That, and Jade Sasser talked about this, that for many young people, racial discrimination is the main concern related to starting a family. And we've talked about all of these different oppressions: capitalism, patriarchy, colonialism. So the root causes of extinction, pollution, and climate change are the same forces of systemic oppression and the marginalization and exploitation of humans. So I really hope that this film and webinar series leads the way for more health, environment, and economic groups to work together. If you want to partner, please reach out. Kim is putting my email in the chat. If you missed any of the prior webinars in the series, the recordings can be found on our website, and Kim is also putting that in the chat. We didn't talk as much about fossil fuels as I thought we may today. We talked about climate change, but really the burning of fossil fuels is this larger issue that gets us to the climate change piece. So the center has an action alert that it's one thing that you can quickly do today that urges President Biden to put an end to the expansion of fossil fuels. So please, Kim is also putting that link in the chat. And then I want to thank all of our panelists, Vicki, Adelita, Sarain, and Payton, and thank Kim and Fabiola for helping us with tech, and all of you for watching today and your interest in this, and thanks for sticking on. Be on the lookout for a follow-up email from the center next week. It's going to include a recording with closed captions and transcriptions, a certificate that you can submit to credentialing bodies, and all these resources and ways to take action to support people on the planet. When you close out, there will be an evaluation. Please, please also take the evaluation. And thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.